It's wedding season. Should it be a pastor who performs the wedding of a Christian couple? That's where we started, and then we went a whole bunch of other directions. That's what's today on the To Be the Church podcast. Welcome to the To Be the Church podcast, where we explore what it looks like to truly be the church in today's culture. Have we all three been here for a while? Were we here last week? I can't remember.
Did I miss?
I wasn't here.
Oh, Ben.
It was just you two.
Abandoning us again.
Well, the whole band is back together.
Yep.
How's summer going?
It's been a lot of work.
Yeah?
Yep.
All right. Well, let's get right to it. Ben, you said you had a question. Thanks for the engagement there, guys.
Summer's great.
You said you texted us earlier, or maybe on the Slack channel, and said, hey, I have a question we can answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this question was from someone at CW to me, and I answered it to them, but I thought this would be a good question for the TBTC podcast. It is wedding season. You guys been at any weddings this summer yet? Officiated?
Yeah, I did a wedding last week. Yep.
I did a wedding last week too.
You did one?
I officiated it, yeah.
Boom. Well, then this is perfect timing.
You didn't officiate one last week? What did you do?
Nope. So here's the question. Hello. I'm wondering if there's a scripture that discusses pastors performing marriage ceremonies, or am I misguided in believing that Christians who choose to marry should be married by the pastor of the church they attend as opposed to an officiant? And is it biblical for a Christian to obtain an officiant's license to perform a marriage ceremony? Looking forward to your response. So, basic question, who should perform Christian weddings? Can any Christian do it? Should it be a pastor? Should it be someone that gets licensed from the Universal Church of America online, whatever people do? What do you guys think? Who should marry Christians?
That's a good question. Well, we could discuss it from a state versus a church type dynamic, right? Like the various states or
this is
governments
specific
have their
to
things.
What should a Christians do?
From like a church standpoint. So they're not asking us about state laws or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and do you think it's okay for a non-pastor Christian to get a license and perform a wedding? Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, from my side of things, who should? Yeah, I think that's a pretty standard role for like a pastor or an elder at a local church. And so, in an ideal world, a Christian is, well, maybe just in a biblical world, like a Christian's plugged in at a local church and is a member there, and they have it doesn't have to be like the lead but they have a pastor or elder that is there at their church who performs that. And we take pastor and elder to be the same role, so I'm just using those terms synonymously. But yeah, so
do you have any biblical warrant for that?
I don't know if the scriptures speak to who performs the wedding ceremony other than the Lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he acts on it, what God joins together. The chief actor on the stage of the wedding ceremony is the Lord, who joins the couple together, husband and wife. The passages that talk about marriage in the New Testament, I'm thinking about Ephesians 5, Colossians 3, 1 Peter 3, talk to husbands and wives. None of those talk about a ceremony in that sense. So, and then you could talk through Jewish weddings in the biblical times, but none of that
I'm not Jewish, so irrelevant.
None of that is, if you're looking for like the biblical framework on the 21st century marriage ceremony, I think your vows, promises like that are made between, it's a covenant. There's lots of things about marriage in the scriptures, but how that ceremony goes and who does it, I don't think we could say like, oh, it has to be your pastor, because it would be unbiblical for it to be your uncle who's not your pastor, but who is capable in the locale that you're in to do that. I don't know. What do you think, Ben?
You thought about this more than we have because you already have the question.
Yeah, you're asking the question. Or you just...
I could have given it to you ahead of time, but you guys don't like that. You like just to go off the cuff. So.
Yeah. That's why this podcast has the content it has thus far.
So that's why we have dozens of regular listeners.
Mark 10, talking about divorce, says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, and the lead pastor shall do the ceremony. So it doesn't say the last part.
That's the amplified version.
Yeah,
the
amplified.
Jesus book.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you what I told this person.
What'd you tell him?
I said there's not a specific passage, which you kind of said that says pastors have to. I think the wisdom, though, and importance of pastors doing it can be deduced from Scripture. So, kind of like you said, when two people get married, God is joining them together as one flesh. Genesis 2:24, Matthew 19:6. So what this means is a Christian marriage is more than just a legal proceeding. There's something spiritual going on. God is literally taking two image bearers and making them one flesh in this permanent covenant union. And so we have that aspect going on with a Christian marriage. We also have the Apostle Paul revealing that marriage is ultimately a picture of Christ's relationship with the church.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so Christians view marriage a lot differently than non-Christians, or even how the state views marriage. And so what I told this person was, because marriage is an institution created by God and is a spiritually significant event and is a picture of Christ and his church, I think a Christian should be married by a pastor who is an under-shepherd of Christ and cares for his flock on his behalf. So
That's a pretty good answer. Yeah. I'll go with that.
I think the language I used was preferable. I don't think it's sinful if your non-pastor Christian uncle goes and gets licensed, and especially from a state legal perspective, that's all you need a licensing for. But the last thing I said to this person is, practically speaking, pastors are also authorized to perform marriages by the state, which makes it easier to cover all your bases, spiritual and legal.
Yeah.
Hope this helps. So I think ideally Christians would be married by a pastor who is representing what God is doing by joining these two people as an under shepherd of the chief shepherd. But I don't think it's necessarily sinful or wrong for a non-pastor to officiate a wedding.
So maybe preferred, not required type of thing,
Yeah.
would be the way you'd say that.
Yeah.
I can agree. I agree with that. And I that's where I think I talked all around the issue in the first 7 minutes of pointless drivel that I offered there. But the first thing I thought when you asked the question, and having 4 daughters, is like, okay, with like my daughters getting married, who would I have marry them and for what reason, right? Would I perform the wedding, or would, whatever else? And I'm, I'll talk to my daughters about that at that, when those stages come, in the sense of what, if they'd like me to perform it, or if they didn't.
I don't think there are enough Kleenex on this planet
your
for you to officiate your
face.
daughters.
If the handkerchief, if they didn't, if they wanted me to just walk them down the aisle and not perform it, I would have, I don't know, one of you two guys probably perform. Like, I'd have another kind of pastor.
You can't afford me.
Yeah, right. Another pastor that is here
Yeah.
at the local church that is oversees them and is a part of their lives. And that I like how you said that, under shepherd as an extension of the chief shepherd, 1 Peter 5, in what that local pastor, that role does. And weddings are a good opportunity for that with a couple, that there's so many, they're going to get married, and if they've grown up in church or whatever, if they're not connected to a church, they're not members of the church, that's always a good opportunity to, like, with premarital counseling and those kind of things, I know we all do that when we're in those premarital counseling phases with a couple. They're like, okay, we're going to get married, so now we need to go to the church and get that all figured out. And you're like, okay, like, do you go to church? Are you a part, and if they're believers, they should be plugged in, rooted members, and, part of a local body. But
Yep.
All right, let's just broaden the question a little bit and talk about weddings in general. All right, I met somebody once who was very adamant that a Christian's wedding needs to be performed in the local church, like in the auditorium of the local church. And so the two different angles to look at that from is, one is the idea of faith family, right? And like, you're making that covenant along or in front of and in a picture to the local church. So I see that side of it. But then there's also like the reality of spatial holiness. And I think this is the part, the place the person was actually coming from, was this idea that, like, it needs to happen in the auditorium because that's a holier place than the wedding venue downtown or whatever. And so what would you say to someone who comes to you and says, like, it's a member of the church, and they're like, hey, like, should I be married in this building? what would you say?
I would say adiaphora. Is that what you would say, Ben?
What does that mean?
You know what that means. Matters which can be accepted or rejected without prejudice to belief, right? Things indifferent.
You knew it so much you had to Google it real
Yeah.
quick.
Well, I mean, off the top of my head, I probably would have said things that you can have matters of conscience on, right? Like adiaphora. Yeah.
Yeah, but even like, yeah, I would say you don't be pressing that upon anybody. Like that's well, on our little thing, that's a decide for. That's not even a debate for, is it? Like, because God's presence in the new covenant is not uniquely dwelling in any building. It's in the individual believer. We are the temple of Spirit, and then collectively, when we gather, we are the temple of the Holy Spirit, living stones in His temple. So, no, I don't think that someone has to get married in a church building. To me, the who's marrying them would be more important. Like we just talked about, I would think a pastor, since it is a spiritual ceremony and not just a legal one, that would be more important to me than the where. And I've officiated weddings in barns and out in the woods, and I don't care about that. I don't think it's a big deal.
In the woods?
I did a one in the woods.
One was
I
like,
remember when you did one in the woods years ago.
one was like maybe 20 people, and it was literally out in the middle of the woods. Like you had to park and walk, and like it was like a special place to this family on their property, but it was in the middle of nowhere. So
The one I did this past week was at a Christmas tree farm, which is pretty cool.
oh yeah,
Which one? Which Christmas tree?
Klopman. The one
Oh, yeah.
in Washougal. Yep, it was fun. Okay, so go ahead. Sorry.
well no, I have more follow-ups, but you go ahead.
Oh, okay, so all right. So as somebody who officiates weddings, have you ever told a couple, "I won't do that"? Like I won't. Like we want this in the ceremony. Sorry, I won't. I won't stand by for that. I've heard of.
I said I'll do many things for love, but I won't do that. Is what I told them. To be specific,
I think like trying to remember somebody, one of our pastors I know pretty well. He's pretty adamant. Like you don't get to write your own vows.
Yeah.
Like it's
yeah.
like that's like the wedding vows are there for a reason. Like it's not just some like this like they say very specific things for specific reasons. So he's like that. Have you ever said like I won't? I don't know. Like you have pretty strong thoughts on who and when and where to do communion. Like if somebody's like we're going to do communion in our ceremony, would you say no?
I would advise against it, but I don't have a problem if I'm trying to think if I've done weddings where they've done communion. If they want to do it, I'm not going to serve it to them as like a pastor, but if they want to do it, like that's fine. I don't think they should. I think that should be done in the context of the local church. Yeah, I've said, I feel similarly about the vows thing. I just always like try to encourage the couple, make sure they're actually vows. Like if you're going to write your own thing, it's not just a story of how you met or everything you love about them or like their, cute idiosyncrasies or whatever. It's like, no, vows are promises. So what are you promising to them? And so I'll usually say, if you want to do that, that's great. But we're also going to kind of do the traditional vows to make sure at least those get said. I'm trying to think if I've told couples that I wouldn't marry them before because they were living in sin.
I've done that many times.
But once we've gotten to the point where I actually would do the wedding, I don't think I've said I wouldn't do anything.
I won't do unity candles. I won't do sand. Seating of the mother of the bride. Refuse to do that. Yeah, no. Any song written before 1982, refuse to have that in the ceremony. No, I have never come to the. I've like Ben. I've had many of those instances, and not even because of like the living in sin type of issue, but more of like there's been for years. I wouldn't marry a couple unless I did the premarital, and many times in that journey, there have been couples that have been like, I'm not gonna, I can't in good conscience perform your wedding. Like you, there's just these issues we need to work out or whatever. Sometimes that becomes a longer sort of counseling type time, and sometimes that counseling is outsourced elsewhere, and then they come back, and then those things have happened. But no, there's never been like an element in a ceremony that I've been and just as Ben's saying, like there's things that I would going back to like from being an officiant of a wedding to when my daughters are at that point, Lord willing, I like the way that I will counsel them on certain things, vows, communion, different things that you've talked about. Like there there are definitely opinions that I have on that stuff, but
And I would just say I'm the same way with, I won't marry a couple unless I've done their premarital or they're getting premarital done by someone that I either know or can talk to. So like if one of you guys did someone's premarital, but then you couldn't officiate and they asked me, as long as you're like, yeah, they're good, like solid, then I would do it. But I'm not just going to do it without that. Cause I feel like by marrying them, I'm endorsing it as a spiritual authority, and I got to know that they're entering it, at least pursuing godliness.
Yeah, here at East Vancouver, we actually have a full-on marriage mentoring ministry that has a whole premarital arm who they do the premarital and then they work alongside whoever's going to officiate it.
Yeah.
Which is actually extremely helpful whenever there's so many people getting married and so many, only so many pastors to do those weddings. And premarital is not in its best form, it's not a meet once or twice type of thing, right? It's an ongoing thing that's really really good. So, all right, you still have follow-ups? Because I have more fun follow-ups, but do you have like serious follow-ups?
I think I forgot the original follow-up, but I have another one. Have you guys done funerals? I'm not sure. Have you done one, Ty?
No, I've not officiated one.
So would you what's more enjoyable, a wedding or a funeral?
I used to think that weddings were more difficult than funerals. I used to, like when I was younger in pastoral ministry, because of the difficulty of like not wanting to screw up somebody's wedding on the wedding day. You know what I mean? And like all the desires of the couples to have it go a certain way and everything else. But and I've done a lot more weddings than I have funerals. But did you say which is more enjoyable? Is that the way you said it? Can I say funeral? That sounds weird.
Well, that's my answer. A funeral for a Christian.
Yes,
I think is one of the most impactful, gospel-centered celebrations that like someone who really loved the Lord and like everyone knows where they're at. I don't know. I just think I've left those. You should, like from worldly perspective, you would be sorrowful, but death has lost its sting, and so it's almost like it gives us this hope and this reorienting to like, man, we do have an eternity and a real hope in Jesus that can take away the sadness we should feel from someone who, a perspective of someone who doesn't have that hope. So obviously you grieve with the people who are grieving and stuff, and that part's not enjoyable that they're sad, but I don't know, there's also a lot of joy in those.
I've done a lot of hard funerals, like not good funeral, not fun funerals, and untimely deaths or different things. And so those ones are a lot. And so that's where interestingly enough, and I've done a few for that you're describing, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of those funerals in our local church in recent years, that would be the fun kind of celebration of life. Really great, our Daryl or like one of our other pastors will handle or kind of be point on, so I'll be there and I'll witness them, but I haven't officiated as many like that.
Yeah, and I don't mean fun years. Like, this is great, someone's
meaningful
dead. And death is still a result of the fall, and it's something we grieve. I'm just saying, like a more deeper than just a happiness or fun, like a joy that like this person's with Jesus and they wouldn't come back even if they could, and we can't wait to be with them someday again. And so more of like that gospel deep joy that goes even beyond our sorrows. Is what I mean.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, Cody sent a question to me about this that he said he had received at one point from a member of our church. Should church members be informed of funerals or weddings of other members?
It depends on the family, I think. It depends on the family. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a size dynamic issue too.
Yeah.
Like if we were to say like, hey, everybody, Johnny's getting married on next Thursday. Like even at a member meeting, there'd be 200 people in the room who are like, "Who's Johnny?" Where like that's not always the case in the majority of churches.
And then they'd say, "Is there going to be food afterwards?"
Yeah, I think that knowing. So size dynamic is one, but the second part, I like the question in the sense of I think knowing members certainly should know when like members pass away or when marriages or like what we do at member meetings is like the
babies being born.
The last 3 months since the last member meeting, whatever, it's been a few months or whatever, here's all the babies that have been born to member families and those things. So I do think those sort of monumental rite of passage moments in the life of members is important for the rest of the members to be able to know about. But yeah, in the sense of like, I could see it at a smaller church, that dynamic being there. I feel like in our day though, that's why I went back to the family, because you're like, if they want to do like a small family ceremony for a funeral, you don't like tell the whole membership, right? So
my experience has been weddings is got a lot more like specific invited people. A lot of times with funeral, it's like we can let the church know that like, and if there's going to be like a special reception afterwards, they just won't tell everyone about that. Like the family will know and they'll go to that. But yeah, I would never announce someone's wedding and then they have a bunch of uninvited guests that they don't have food for and all that stuff. I would lean on the family for that.
All right, last question. What is the worst or weirdest thing you've ever seen at a wedding? And I know every time we ask these questions, we have to like filter through our mind and say like, okay, is this person likely to listen to this podcast? Let me think of the second weirdest or worst thing I've ever done or ever seen at a wedding. What do you got? Anything?
I do not have these type of things locked and loaded.
One that I've officiated or just in general. I remember, I don't know if this is worse, kind of a funny story though. So I was at a wedding and there was a lot of dancing, a lot of 80s and 90s rock and stuff. And my wife's Aunt Stephanie, she's definitely not going to listen to this podcast. She kept trying to get me to dance. And she knew I was a pastor. And so she came up to me one time.
And Baptist.
Yeah, and grew up Bobby Baptist, and she's like, David danced for the Lord. And like, it wasn't clicking. I was like, who's David? And she's like, from the Bible. And then I said, you know what, Aunt Steph, I don't think David danced to pour some sugar on me. I don't think that was what was happening, because that was the song that was playing at that time. So yeah, not a big wedding dancer, but David danced for the Lord. I'll never forget that.
Who's David?
Who's David? I was like, is this a cousin or something? No, King David. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a story that I've heard from one of our previous pastors who used to be here, but at either his wedding or his brother's sister's wedding or something like that, the bride came up and started dancing rather affectionately up against someone she thought was her husband, but it was her husband's brother. And it was like, that was and it was like in front of everybody. So that's probably the most awkward or weird. But the one that I've witnessed specifically that's pretty funny is that the pastor of the wedding was marrying his son and his son's fiance, and it was happened to be his wedding anniversary, and so he brought his wife up and gave her flowers and talked for like 3 or 4 minutes about her, like during the wedding. And he just was super long-winded on everything. And I might have told the story on here before, actually. But like one of the bridesmaids, it was in a hotel ballroom, and one of the bridesmaids passed out during it and hit her head on the corner of the temporary staging and then fell off of it. And EMS had to be called. The wedding stopped completely. And she wakes up as she's being wheeled down the center aisle on a stretcher, and she realizes what's happening, and she just starts screaming, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Just like knowing how no one wants to script somebody else's wedding day, and just makes it so much worse. And I don't know. That was maybe the best.
Didn't you make some like little comment to him too? Like if you didn't go so long, maybe she wouldn't have passed out.
Yeah. It's one of the only times a preacher has ever cussed at me at a wedding. All right. Well, there you go. Hit us up if you have questions. Podcast@tobethechurch.com. Have a great week.